Here on the sharing the screen with me is Dr. Marti Spiegelman. I am just delighted that she has accepted to be with us. We had a wonderful chance to, I had a chance to learn with and from her, let's put it this way. A little bit about her background. Marti holds a BA in biochemistry from Harvard University, an MFA in graphic design from Yale School of Art and Architecture, and has advanced training in neurophysiology, psychology, and anthropology. She was president of her own graphic design firm for 20 years and founded something called Shaman's Light, which is a professional training program dedicated to the creation of abundance through evolved consciousness and passion-based work. Indeed, that is where I encountered her, and as I learned with her from her in that program. She served as a fellow of REX, the Relationship Economy Expedition, founded by Jerry Michalski. She was also named the 2010 Cambridge Registry Executive Professional of the Year for her work in applying the principles of consciousness to the evolution of business and environmental action. And she was a presenter at TEDx Berkeley in 2011. Marti is also a member of the Content Evolution Federation of Business Advisors, where she's working with business colleagues to develop groundbreaking methodologies for raising the level of consciousness in the practice, organization, and evolution of business, finance, and world governance. And in that sense, brings us right back to the first speaker who we had a pleasure of listening to, Fred Tsao, who also is working directly with the business world in this effort to raise consciousness. So, Marti, thank you for being with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's really great to be with you again. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I'm going to talk about consciousness in a slightly different way. And I'm going to ask you all to have kind of in mind the importance of how we use awareness. I work mostly now in shamanic traditions, indigenous traditions, and the bulk of my time is spent in South America with the elders and the spirits they work with in the Andes. So a lot of what I'm going to bring to you is from their understanding of consciousness, and it's actually a very technical understanding. So I want to start with a little parable. And this little parable, if you're open-minded enough to understand that there are spirits in the world who speak with audible voices, this comes from a mountain spirit whose name is Chaupi Orco. It means mountain in the middle. And he was talking to us one day about consciousness and how we are in the West, and he's got a little frustrated, so he told us this story. And he said to us, imagine an ordinary man who decides to live in service. So he's out seeking how to do that, and one day he's sitting on a bluff overlooking a valley, and it's sunset, and he's very discouraged, and he's holding his head and looking at the ground. And he hears a voice inside his own head, and the voice says, have you met God? Have you experienced the mystery yet? And he hears the voice and he sort of answers to himself, well, no, I'd be arrogant if I said yes to that. But at the same moment, he lifts his head and he sees in front of him the most glorious sunset that ever has occurred on planet Earth. But in that same moment, he feels all of his senses sparked. He feels connected to his entire environment. But he also realizes he can't describe it to himself. He can't name it, he can't label it. And so he gets really discouraged and depressed. He gets really disappointed. And he gets up and he says to himself, well, I guess I'll go look for God someplace else. This is really the quandary we're in. Are we willing to experience? And what does this have to do with consciousness? So I've got another little story for you, and this is a story about Max Planck, a very famous physicist. And Max writes a little tale about a day when he was sitting in his lab with a model of an atom. And I remember in the old days when scientists had these big fat models of molecules and atoms. So he's sitting with this big physical thing, and it's got a nucleus and electrons and all that stuff, and he's feeling it. He describes feeling this model. And he said that, after a while, I could feel that there are forces that keep the electrons in their orbits. And then he sat with it longer because he was very fascinated with this experiential moment he's having. And after a while, he realized that there is an intelligence that moves the forces that keep the electrons in their orbits. Pure experience. There is no other way to have discovered that. Yeah. And I'm going to propose to you that in the oldest human traditions, we have always understood that intelligence as consciousness with a capital C, and everything else that we can experience, discover, have, create, everything else is an expression of that intelligence on the move. Absolutely everything. And when we experience that intelligence, we'll find, and I'll try to open this up as I go, we'll find that we become organized by specific principles that give us everything we're looking for. We don't have to define a thing. We have to be in the experience. So let's talk about this intelligence a little bit, and I'm going to use a scientific lens now. If you take a look at what cosmometrists are doing, these are people who study the cosmos. They have stated many, many times, there's actually a website, cosmometry.net, you can take a look at. They say that consciousness is a flow of energy and information. The universe is filled with this flow of energy and information. It's the same thing Max Planck experienced. It's the same thing the mountain spirit was talking about, right? A constant flow. And in physics, if you have a flow, and you can see this looking at a little stream, that flow will, at unpredictable moments, create a whirlpool. And if you're looking at water, you'll get whirlpools. If you're looking at the universe, what you get is a torus dynamic. Yeah, you get a beautiful spherical shape that is created by a flow into it, through it, and out of it. And that flow circulates through that. It's kind of a donut shape, informing the torus shape, connecting all torus shapes to every other torus shape. Right? This is how the universe is. If you don't like spirituality, go to science. Science will describe the same thing to you, right? So this flow of energy and information, this is consciousness. This is God. This is Huitacochan Tixi-Capac, as they say in the Andes. This is, in some cultures, something that is so innate to life that people don't bother to name it. In the Andes, there's a prayer, you of 1,000 names, you who have a name we cannot speak. And I think the challenge for modern people is to experience this flow, to experience how it is constantly informing us, and what comes into us, human consciousness as an expression of the big consciousness. Human consciousness has its own way of processing that information and creating and adding again to life and to the universe. And every other thing in the world does the same thing. A redwood tree does it in its own way. A jaguar does it in its own way. Humans have a unique way of being that flow, processing incoming information, putting things back out into the world. And if we can taste this, if we can experience this, then all of the questions of duality, of religion, one versus the other, of political, whatever, all of that goes away. And we end up with a very, very different experience of the universe. How do we get there? That's always the question. We like to ask how questions. So let's go to one of the oldest, I'm going to say exercises, teaching tools on the planet as far as humans are concerned. If you go into the oldest of the indigenous traditions on almost every continent, you will find this teaching, and it was given to children as soon as they could understand what to do. And the teaching is this, that you go out into nature and you find a place that speaks to you. You have to feel it. It has to attract you. Yeah? It has to feel good. It has to feel powerful. It might even be a little bit scary, but you sit yourself down there And your job is to experience that whole environment through your senses without thinking. No naming, no story, no merging. Oh, it was a redwood tree. None of that, right? Pure sensory experience, taking in all of the data, knowing every little thing visible or invisible, because it's all knowable. Yeah, doing that until you experience your membership, until you experience your place in the greater scheme of things, until you realize that that entire diverse environment is speaking into your torus dynamic, informing you, guiding you, igniting your passion, yeah, igniting your presence, igniting your purpose. And from that, you know how to live your life. You don't struggle with questions because the universe is guiding you, is, as they say in indigenous cultures, speaking you into being. Now, I want to make an important point here. We do have, if we go one continent to the next, and I've been initiated on 4 continents, in every geography, there is a different picture of this flow of energy and information, right? There might be a slightly different word or a slightly different image or symbol. Yeah, different kinds of relationships are important here and not so important there. And the reason this is true is this flow of energy and information. One of the torus dynamics it creates is the entire planet, right? And from that torus dynamic, we are spoken in our little human torus dynamics, and redwood trees and prairies and all the animals have their own torus dynamics. So there is a different language from the earth into our awareness. If I'm in West Africa or South America or North America, so my images, my symbols, the way I process data into language is going to be a little bit different, but the source is the same. And we have become so focused on outcome that we start to distinguish outcome and ask questions, and we can't find the source anymore because we are no longer putting awareness out into the world and making relationship with the source flow of energy and information. So the Yaquis in central Mexico, they're very smart about modern people. And one of the things that they say is that if you look at a human being, they will say that the core of our being is the act of perception. And the magic of our being is the act of awareness. Now, I was very taken by that little teaching. And so, as I often do, I went back to the Latin and Greek roots of the word perception. Because in the English language, any of you who've taken half a look will know that the meaning of words changes over years, and many of these meanings flip to the opposite. So I looked at the word perception, and instead of being subjective, it is quite precise. Originally, it means to know the world through the senses. To know the world through the senses. And 24/7, you can't stop this because you're human, you're a biological entity. 24/7, you are picking up data from the world around you. Sensory data, not thoughts, not ideas, not opinions, pure data. And that data is recorded with incredible precision in your energy architecture and eventually in your nervous system. And depending on how skillful you are with awareness, you can access it, create with it, and so on. But we are informed by this world, whether we know it or not. If we can tap into the pure experience of being informed, we can begin to understand everyone's language because the source is the same. You'll begin to be able to see a symbol on one continent and a symbol on the next one and know they mean the same thing, because this is what consciousness does. It informs everything in the same way. The expressions are multifold because they're intended to be multifold. So it's not so much that we have different kind of consciousness, one versus the other, but we have multiple expressions of the big consciousness. All right, now let's go back to that little exercise. Let's say that I take myself out into the forest and I sit down And because I'm Western, I have a little trouble with this, and I'm thinking and judging and measuring and naming and labeling. And all of a sudden I feel the warmth of the sun on me, and that takes me out of my thinking mind into pure experience. And I get better and better and better at doing that. What is going to happen is my awareness will be drawn away from my ego, hallelujah, into the world. And I will get more and more comfortable being connected into the world. And I will begin to beam love into the world, not because somebody told me to, but because this is what consciousness does. And I will begin to receive highly specific data for me as a unique part of the big whole. And I will begin to live into that data and those instructions, and I will express myself through those connections. And in this way, I become a fully conscious person. Right now, that's still a pretty general statement. So let's go to one of the most famous elders in the Andean traditions, Don Manuel Quispe. He was a very powerful shaman, and he spoke to these mountain spirits I've referenced. And he said that one of the first things that we have to do if we want to really become conscious and live well is we have to show up in what he called innocence. And he didn't mean naivete. He meant totally present, awareness into the world, connected, receiving information, in membership, no agenda, no judgment, no withholding, no hiding, just present. Now, if you can manage to do this, you will have a moment of feeling completely free of the constraints of space and time. You will not be burdened by a past. You will not be worried about a future, because in that moment of complete presence, totally wired into the world, awareness doing what it's supposed to do, you have no burdens. There's nothing, all the contemplative traditions say all we have is now, and we Westerners go, oh yeah, right. What are we doing tomorrow? Right? It takes discipline to train your awareness to pick up what is actually occurring now and pop yourself outside of time into this moment of total presence, total freedom. And guess what you experience in that same moment? You will have a profound experience of membership. Membership in the big conscious universe. Membership as the speech of that intelligence that's always flowing and creating. You will experience this. It's not something that you define or think about. You can't think your way there. You can only experience it. So in this same moment, what Don Manuel would say is that the universe will respond to people who have become that conscious, will respond to us in what he called wholeness. And what that means is that in that moment, you will begin to recognize opportunity. You'll begin to recognize feasible opportunity. What can be done now that also has enough fertility in it to keep on going. So consciousness brings with it an ability to recognize fertility and momentum. But if we're not plugged into the world, we don't get any of this. Right? So we show up in what he called innocence. I'm going to call it full consciousness. Yeah, the universe responds to us. And in that same moment, we have access to what Manuel called the grid of creation, which is technically a dimension of consciousness where we can reach beyond the known and call stuff in and create what nobody's ever thought about. So I'm sure you've all had at least a small moment, those times when you get the best downloads. It's like, oh my God, where did that come from? Well, it came from this other dimension of consciousness that we can rarely reach because our awareness is too focused on ourselves and our thoughts and so on. So I'm speaking of consciousness the way Indigenous people have always understood it, no matter what they call it. And this is technical. So let me come to some of these principles. If I can get myself out into nature. I would prefer to be able to do this at my desk, which I do all the time, right? Releasing my awareness to the world around me, getting my awareness off myself, at times even completely out of my physical structures, because my energy structure can hold my awareness much better, right? Into the world, informed by the world. I am immediately organized by one of these principles of consciousness. I am organized by a principle called Pacha, P-A-C-H-A. And Pacha has a lot of different translations. It's an old Quechua and Aymara word. But for our purposes, this word Pacha is referring to a coordinate in, let's call it the fabric of space and time. When I get my awareness plugged into the world around me, I am inhabiting my torus dynamic, my dimensional coordinate. And in that moment, the universe is feeding me. I'm aware of that flow of energy and information. I'm aware of what my own consciousness creates with it. I'm aware of where I can gift that out into the world. That is full presence. That is full consciousness. And it depends on how I'm using awareness, and I have to be precise with it. In that same moment, I'm about to come to a topic everybody's mentioned. In that same moment, I am also organized by a principle. The Quechua word is munay, M-U-N-A-Y. And munay means to love, but munay is also the principle of universal love. Universal love, technically, this isn't about, oh, I love you. This is about the capacity to be aware of and accept everything as it is. Absolutely everything as it is. No agenda, no attachment, no power plays, to simply be connected in the world. And in this loving moment, we are fully conscious and we have access to everything. This capacity, these two principles, we are immediately organized by them when we plug into the world, when we plug into that conscious universe. There are other technical principles of consciousness we have to work at. Those other principles guide us in good relationships, all the things we're seeking, good governance, good community, all of those things. But the first two principles are key. And without that, we do not have full consciousness at all. So we've come to this principle of love. Again, it is central. And Manuel always said that it was the hub of our membership is this embodiment of Munay. So I want to come back to two things that this same mountain spirit said, and this will be my closing statement to you. First of all, the same mountain spirit said that humans need to be stewards of their own momentum. And this momentum comes from Munay, from that unconditional principle of love. The spirit said, this is your time. Your journey is what is unfolding out of your deep love. By embodying Munay, you will create an open-ended map for your journey, a map that's always open to new possibilities and cannot be polarized by good and bad. You must open your hearts to the world. And his final statement is what I want you to really remember. Only when you have fully embodied this principle of Munay will you understand what consciousness really is.
Oh my goodness, Marti, thank you so much. For a moment more, we could make all the connections now. You have done such an amazing job here to bring us all into a focus.